My name is Matthew Fink. I'm a licensed architect and associate at Land Associates. I have roughly a decade of experience in educational design, and I actually come from a family full of educators. So it's been a passion of mine, and it's been something I've been studying and actively involved in to create great learning spaces for this next generation.
I'm Gabriella Fink. I am a program coordinator over at New Directions, which is an adolescent partial care program for outpatient therapy. And before I became a mental health therapist, I was an educator. So I love to merge education and mental health when I am working with my adolescents who are 12 to 17. And through Matt, I've developed an passion for architecture and looking at really cool spaces from not only the mental health aspect of it, an educator's perspective, but then also from an architectural standpoint as well.
Good morning. My name is Matthew Murphy. I'm the superintendent of Ramsey Public Schools. I've been involved in public education as a teacher, principal, and central office for 29 years. I also serve as the vice president of West Bergen, which is one of the largest mental health providers in the state of New Jersey. Well, it should be of no surprise that we're seeing mental health issues more and more in our schools and in our community. So it's really important that we become aware of the signs, symptoms, and most important, destigmatizing mental health and making sure that our kids and our parents really know that recovery is a real possibility if there is early detection. A phrase that was probably used back in the day is character education and social and emotional learning. In addition, I think we're being more explicit with mental health. In Ramsey, a few years ago, we wrote it right into our curriculum in grades 6 through 12, mental health awareness. We also, along with many other districts, have mental health counselors dedicated to these types of issues. That's the real difference, is I think we're being more explicit and more direct than we were in the past.
I think the biggest thing that educators and mental health professionals can do to promote mental health awareness is to simply talk about it. The more we talk about it with our students, our children, and other adults, we'll really start to break down some of the barriers and the stigmas surrounding mental health. Because if we can talk about cancer and medical treatment freely, why can't we talk about mental health issues? There shouldn't be stigma surrounding it, and the more we talk about it, the more people are going to be able to ask for help and receive help, because the stigma is not going to be surrounding it as much as it is today. I hope it does. I think it is starting to become more of an open conversation, especially in Bergen County. We do have so many different programs and wonderful school districts that are really pushing forward in talking about mental health awareness. And just recently, it will become part of the curriculum in the year 2020, 2021 for school districts to start putting mental health awareness into their curriculums now. And I'm hoping that that'll just continue to develop, because mental health doesn't discriminate against who it affects. It affects everybody.
As an architect, we obviously have a client, and we have to design for the client. And with public schools, I love saying public schools because they're for a community, that we're building a space for the community and by the community. So we have to make sure it's about their ideas, their goals. At the same time, there's this whole idea of architecture as the third feature, that children learn from adults, from other children, and also the environment around them. So architecture plays a crucial part in the upbringing, safety, and education of children everywhere. So there's two different things here. The first is that, good design is good design. That if you bring in certain elements like biophilia, sensory, and experience is throughout the entire space, it promotes a better environment. At the same time, we can also look at it from the corporate office standpoint, that the design of corporate offices is changing, because if you're stuck there 40, 50, 60 hours a week, it's a place that you should want to be at. So schools are evolving the same way, that if children are there for X amount of years, let's make it a home away from home. Let's put in different professionals who can provide a positive role model and a positive environment. That way they get the full experience, even if they don't have it at home. Absolutely. That there are studies on how color and light affect people, that natural light is good for the body, that it's good for the mind, and that personalization of space makes you feel more at home. So through these different design efforts in today's schools versus what we've seen early on in the century, where it was the standard desks in a row and this is your boring white box, by providing more of that community feel, that personalization, that a public school is for the public, it does change the environment around you.
I think a lot of it goes to, what are we using this space for? And you first and foremost want your students or my consumers to have a sense of warmth and comfort and safety when they're walking into a space. The Kohl's boxes that we all grew up with in our classrooms really didn't foster that. But now when you're walking in, the different personalities of teachers are really being shown, and students are able to feel a connection to their classroom and to their teachers and to their peers. And unfortunately, social media and technology are wonderful things, but at the same time, they also limit our connection with people. And when we limit our connection with people, we're not necessarily developing all those social skills that we were fortunate to develop early on because we were face-to-face with people. So when you're coming into a space and you feel a connection with those around you, it helps to make those social connections and develop those social skills that many of my consumers and my students sometimes lack because they're so glued down to their phones.
There's a lot of commonalities between, good educational design and good mental health design. There's a whole push now for mindfulness and meditation, just because we'll take meditation, for example, that it provides focus. And then providing focus would then lead to better study habits, better test scores, better overall learning. So by combining these two efforts, it just kind of makes sense that we're improving the mind, the education, the body, everything for the actual student. It is. I think we can all agree on that. And it's something we should allot space for. That in a lot of the classrooms I design, we're kind of breaking outside the box, blurring the boundaries of the standard classroom. So you can learn in different spaces, you can provide, opportunities for growth in different spaces, and there's a home for these new kind of features in flexible environments.
You can practice mindfulness or meditation in any space. And that's one of the best things that when I can teach my kids is coping skills and how you can implement those coping skills in a classroom if you're getting anxious. And when you fuse the design perspective where kids then know that I can go to this corner or I can go reset in this section, get myself together, and then return back to the classroom with a healthier mindset, and then I can focus better. We're teaching them at such a young age to do that. And then when they go on into college and then into the workforce, they're able to use those same coping skills, and they can do it from their office chair.
I think it's interesting that Gabby says, that mindfulness can happen anywhere, but we try to create spaces that only improve it. So recently we just completed a 3-story elementary school where in the center is this beautiful glass courtyard with an amphitheater and tons of plants and other natural things. So imagine escaping the classroom, taking a breath, and looking into this space. You're still within the educational environment, but it's stuff that's proven to promote the atmosphere. That, again, natural daylight, having access to nature. These are things that only improve the human experience. So we're trying to create other areas beyond just the classroom to help the students.
The definition of a middle school, say grade 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, when you're going through probably the second largest, growing spurt, your brain is changing, your body's expanding in all different ways. I think you do have to think about that in a developmental, appropriate way for a middle schooler versus a second grader versus a 17 or 18-year-old, especially because research has been pretty clear that the signs and symptoms of mental health conditions are there, but we're actually, and Gabby could probably speak to this better than I could, we're slow to recognize them. So oftentimes the signs and symptoms were there, but we couldn't discern between typical adolescent behavior and mental health condition, and we were slow to get them the treatment plan.
And society as a whole, the United States, unfortunately, is a reactive society, not a proactive society. We can know that there are issues going around, and sometimes, like Dr. Murphy, you just said, we're slow to recognize them, or parents are in denial, or other students don't have the language and the tools to tell a teacher that they're seeing a behavior in their friend that is different than, a month ago. But if we start giving them the language and the tools to recognize those symptoms, often the kids pick up on things a lot faster than the adults. And breaking down the barriers and having the conversation and not having, a student and a teacher speaking, or a therapist and a student and a client speak, but really just allowing two people to speak openly about what they're seeing and what's going on. We break down the barriers and we can start recognizing different signs and symptoms that people are having. If we're teaching this in our schools, a kid might then recognize and go home that mom isn't taking her medication and mom is struggling, or dad has been drinking too much. And, we start to notice how trauma can affect they're starting to recognize the signs that someone might need help. And then if they feel comfortable in speaking to someone, then we can get whoever's affected by it the help that they need. And especially in today's society, we've got a large drug use. We've got a lot of vaping. Everybody knows about all the vaping issues that are going on now in the media that are bringing to light. Our suicide rate is high across the board. It's not in one age group that we're having suicide rates skyrocket in the country right now. And teaching them the language, teaching them the signs as best as possible will really help them to identify who's in need of help.
So going back to the architecture standpoint, it's important that we look at schools as community-infused buildings, like the same way we look at a home, that it's a place for people to gather, it's a place for people to interact, and we should be designing an environment specifically for that. That we can't do the whole, cells and bells approach where it's just classrooms lined up after each other, but creating different areas of interaction just from a 21st century learning standpoint, but also from this new aspect of mental health, that we want to bring people together and make sure that we're creating, positive places to express opinions, ideas, and even struggles. It's not as prominent as we would like it to be. I think there are a select few districts who are really on the cutting edge of this. I think we don't see it as often as we'd like. So recently within our company, we started doing visioning sessions before we come up with a design, where we bring in key stakeholders from the teachers, the children, and anybody else the district thinks is important to help design the space together. We'll bring in Play-Doh, we'll bring in pipe cleaners, Lego figures, and all that, so we can all design the space and what would make us happy. So as architects and designing the built community, we want to make, again, sure it's for and by the people.
And from the mental health standpoint, when I'm working with my kids, I unfortunately can't speak to the school unless I have parent permission. And one of the biggest things that we try to work with the parents is understanding that there is a sense of community when we are working with their children. New Jersey has a wonderful philosophy where we basically wrap services around the family. So we help all aspects of their lives. And we really try to connect with the families, the community, like the school, other agencies, and then fuse it with a therapy, because you cannot just treat the child. You have to treat the entire family, just like you can't treat a mother without treating the rest of the family. And mental health, really, when we look at it from a community standpoint, we're able to have such a better success rate because there's so many different people who are involved and so many different eyes watching to make sure that the situation is changing and is getting better for the individuals affected.
I think we have to be deliberate. I think we have to acknowledge that it is a huge area of concern for us, both as educators, parents, and in society. I think teaming up with organizations like Gabby's and West Bergen, I think we need to encourage better private-public type of relationships. And I just recently was on a call with Assemblywoman Huddle's office the other day, talking about encouraging those type of relationships between the experts like Gabby and public schools, because public schools aren't necessarily equipped with the expertise to do this the right way. And then when you add someone like Matthew and his firm into it, you really are starting to see a tsunami of energy, but it's not as much or as quick as we need it to be.
So the biggest thing that we always try to do is when we are speaking with the different school districts, we tell the counselors or whoever we're speaking to about our program, so that if they have a family that comes to them in need and they need to make a referral to our program, they understand, because my program is so specialized and we are one of the only ones in the county that are designed the way we are, where kids have 2 group therapies per night. They have individual sessions, family sessions as needed, medication management. We're basically like a one-shop place. Educating the different school districts on our program is really important. And we participate in different mental health fairs. We were recently at Indian Hills High School, and they are doing a wonderful program where they do Wellness Wednesdays about once a month, where they bring in different agencies, different programs, different activities for the high schoolers to participate in during their lunch period, and kind of reset and learn different coping skills, learn different resources that are available to them and their families. We also have an entire development department where they are really working with the school districts, trying to do various trainings. There's one called the Nurtured Heart, where it's all about the way you're approaching the child. There's another one called the Mental Health First Aid Training that the county puts out that are free for anyone to come into and learn the signs. And the more people that know the resources that are available, then the more people can help. They can help. So I'm actually on the Walswick Stigma Free team as their mental health professional, and I just worked with them to create a bookmark of different resources with all phone numbers, so that we can hand them out at different events. And it's a quick little thing that they can hand out to anyone, and they're automatically given a ton of resources. But we have to do more as a society than just give someone a piece of paper with a phone number. That's not enough. We really need to keep pushing it so that we can do a little bit more.
We've definitely, approached design a little bit differently, but not in the way you're thinking. I think one of the best examples is the Sandy Hook Elementary School, that they created something beautiful after something terrible. And they're creating a great environment through beautiful design and through, hidden methods where it's not let's put, metal detectors at the door, but let's use, different permeable design features to accent the space and make everybody feel more comfortable in the environment.
One is, of course, safety is at the forefront of everyone's, when you read the newspaper, we're always thinking about it. So there are a lot of safety measures that have been now required by the state of New Jersey, or school districts are doing in tandem with their school architect like Matt.
Right. There are design standards out there that we need to conform to or exceed.
Yeah. One of the things that I'm concerned about is we're not sure what the long-term impact this will have on our communities, because some schools are really locking down, and I'm putting that in parentheses, and creating, I think, an environment that sends the wrong message. When you work
through this stuff, we're promoting anxiety and fear, and going back to that whole thought of they're here for 30, 40 hours a week, make it a place they want to be, that they feel comfortable in, that they feel happy in. And we can do that through certain design methods. That way we're not emphasizing them, but they're still in place. Sorry to cut you off, Dr. Murphy.
No, you're absolutely right, Matt. And Matt and his team does a wonderful job of marrying the two. But there's no doubt that when schools were built, we have very old schools in my district, this wasn't even a thought, right? You didn't even think about lockdowns or security plungers where, there's a light going off saying there's an intruder. So you have to retrofit very old buildings built in the 1930s and trying to still keep a community sense of it's safe, it's welcoming. It's a challenge, but I think a lot of school districts and firms like Matt are really good at it. And have protocols and procedures and mechanisms in place that do make sense, right? So again, I understand the need for it. I'm just concerned that if school districts are not thoughtful about it, we could really be doing some additional harm to our communities.
And that's why we put a focus on mental health, because it's looking at problems before they arise, that trying to find ways to help people before we have to create these other concerns, really, right?
Yeah, I definitely think so. So from my perspective, it's gotten to the point where there's mass shootings that are occurring all the time. And it's crazy when you look at the statistics of it, that I could have the number wrong, but I think it's 4 casualties, or 3 casualties considers it a mass shooting. And we're destigmatizing ourselves to it, desensitizing ourselves rather, to it, where the same impact when Sandy Hook happened is not the same impact that we're having. I'm tripping over my words here because this is a topic that frustrates me so much, just as a society in the United States, because we're not doing enough for our youth. We really aren't. We're creating more anxiety, more depression, higher suicide rates, because children don't feel safe in their schools, and we're not helping them as adults to feel safe in their schools as a society. But when you have forward-thinking school districts and forward-thinking architects who are trying to create school safety in a way where a student might necessarily see, there's certain protocols that are put in place, because it's so hard sitting on the opposite side of a child who is telling you that they don't want to go to school because they're scared that they are going to get shot, or parents who are asking you, do you think that I need to purchase a bulletproof backpack for my child? We're doing something wrong as a society if that's the focus of our conversations. And the more stress that we're putting on our youth, the worse it's going to be for them when they become adults.
This was from a conversation I was in a long time ago in a convention. We talked about toxic stress and its impacts. That if you have a safe place to retreat to, whether it's in your school, your home, or somewhere with individual you trust and respect, you can lower that stress. But there are so many children who don't have that opportunity. This stress level stays at a constant high, really affecting their well-being, their growth, their development. So again, looking at architecture as that their teacher, that environment builder, so we can help lower that stress level and create places for people to grow.
Well, I think it goes back to what we've been saying is the more that we recognize the signs early, we can really start to make change. And I just met with a group of high school and college age young men who were affected by their best friend's suicide recently. He was 20 years old and he committed suicide, and they decided to create a foundation in his name so that they could help mental health in the schools. And I was talking to them, from an educator standpoint, and when you have a young child who is upset and doesn't know how to regulate their emotions, if we don't help them regulate their emotions, understand what they're feeling, give them coping skills, that could fester and create anxiety down the line or depression down the line. And if we're not targeting that through the schools, and now all of a sudden we have someone who's in high school and there's more stress going on and they don't know how to regulate their stress, they don't know how to regulate their body, what they're feeling, they don't know who to talk to, we can create a disastrous situation where they could potentially take the life of someone else or their own lives because they don't know how to reach out and get the help that they need. So by creating a conversation and teaching everybody who's involved, because the whole saying of it takes a village to raise a child is completely true. If everybody in that village, everybody in that community is able to recognize the signs, then we can do something at a much earlier age than when we have a teenager whose anger is completely out of control, or a teenager whose anxiety is now preventing them from achieving their goals that they had when they were younger.
Yeah. I think it's also putting in the right people on the right programs. I actually pulled up a stat here that it's a good practice for every 250 students to have one counselor.
Which is still a ridiculous number.
Which is a ridiculous number, and one that a lot of districts don't have, that they don't have people in place to attend to these needs. And I feel that Dr. Murphy's district and his programs are really creating, the evolution and the next steps for how districts should look at mental health and different trainings.
And piggybacking off of that is that if we're supposed to have one counselor for 250 students, what stress are we putting on that counselor? We look at it from, right?
I hope they're getting paid well.
But they're not. That's like the crazy thing is you're putting so much pressure. And I can say this as being someone who's been in a school and also being a counselor, is we freak out when we have low ratios for counselor to child. And when we have 10 kids on our caseload, it's like, oh my gosh, we have a lot we have to do with these kids. We can't target every single need that they have. I have a very needy bunch of children. Obviously, I do because of the reasons why they're there. But when you have 250 children to one person, that's astronomical.
Well, I think this is where Dr. Murphy is
right.
the prime example, that he's a merge of two.
Right.
That by just simply interacting with the students that he has, he can see these signs, but also be a positive role model for anybody who's in need.
Right, because, we put the focus so much on the children in the schools, but we're not always looking at the effect that we're also having on the educators and the other school support personnel that are working with them. We're putting demands on the teachers, we're putting demands on the counselors that they've never had those demands put on them before, with the way our society is going right now. And Dr. Murphy, you could probably speak more to that than I could.
You're absolutely right. We have a lower ratio than that. That is a ridiculous number. And listen, bottom line is all research says the following, that having young adults connected to an adult is the best proactive type of factor we can do. So that means whether or not they feel close to a parent, a teacher, or a coach, that is ultimately the best thing that we can do to help them recognize and realize that they can recover from a mental health condition. And that's why we need to have better trained personnel in our schools and in our community, coaches, police officers, first responders. So these young people do have a trusted adult in their lives.
I'll say that times have changed, that educational facilities are not what they once were. They're not where we just cram information into students and let them go. It's a place where we really take them from childhood to adulthood and form the people that they are to become. So with that in mind, we should be creating spaces that help them through every scenario, not just passing a test.
I think for me, it goes back to what I said in the very beginning, is having a conversation, talking about it. It's no different than if you broke your arm and you needed to go to the hospital. Mental illness is no different than that. It's our brain needs to be worked on. And if we look at it like that, I think more people would be open to speaking about it and talking about it and recognizing the signs and symptoms early on instead of being in denial. And it's so much easier to say than it actually is. But I think just talking about it is the best method for us to open up those conversations surrounding mental health and asking questions.
I completely agree with what Matt and Gabby have said so eloquently. I would just end with this. I think public schools can be the great common denominator. I think we have, we're usually the largest employers in town. We have arguably the most valuable commodities in those towns. We are the meeting place, not only during the day, but I can tell you in Ramsey, our buildings are used for the community 6 days a week at night. So I do believe that schools can be a common denominator to help solve these problems. However, unless we are bold enough to bring together the intersection of architecture, of safety, of mental health therapy and providers, we're not going to be able to beat this problem because it is too big for us to be rowing in different directions. And I am concerned that that if we do not come together, that generations of children will be lost.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Absolutely. We have a huge crisis on our hands here. And we don't have enough people doing something about it.
But there's also a lot of hope, because with the 3 people on the line here, when you work together, you can do some great things. It's about having the right people in the room and having the same vision.